Here's what's coming up on your horizon. Well, now is the time at the state capitol when all things are possible. 746 new bills and joint resolutions are in the Senate, another 952 in the House, not to mention the 1,724 measures carried over from last session, all now in committee, most of which will never see the light of day. Yet legislative leadership will still have plenty to work on this session. We begin today with some viewpoints from a left-leaning think tank's annual budget summit.
We didn't get into this mess overnight. It's not just oil and gas prices that put us here.
We continue our policy look with a cautionary tale of governing known as the Kansas experiment.
The poorest 40% of Kansans actually saw their overall net tax burden go up.
Our Courtney May will look at what $120 million in renovations will get you at the state capitol. And we'll meet some young people who have our state's top leaders puckering up. Stay with us for this edition of Oklahoma Horizon.
Oklahoma Horizon is made possible by Career Tech, a job for every Oklahoman and a workforce for every company. With additional support from the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining us here on Horizon. I'm Rob McClendon. Well, with the Oklahoma legislature back in session, lawmakers are facing some increasingly difficult decisions. The state's appropriated budget sitting close to $1 billion below earlier projections, and there is no shortage of suggestions on how to fix it, which took us to the Oklahoma Policy Institute's Budget Summit. With more, here's our Blaine Singletary.
Can't get there.
A packed crowd gathered for OPI's Budget Policy Summit, and one of the big questions at the summit was, of course, how did we get here?
You know, it's a combination of a number of things. Obviously, the plummeting oil and gas prices are playing a role. When oil is $30 a barrel, Oklahoma, being an energy-dependent economy, is always going to be suffering difficulties.
That's David Blatt, Executive Director of the Oklahoma Policy Institute, and he says while oil is part of today's shortfall, there were still problems at the state capitol even when oil cost 3 times as much.
We were still not able to give our teachers a raise. We were still dealing with overcrowded correctional facilities and untreated mental illness. We have seen that in good times and in bad, Oklahoma is falling short of being able to pay for its bills.
So in order to get a look at what's causing this long-standing problem, Blatt says don't just focus on the here and now.
We have passed over $1 billion in income tax cuts over the last decade. That has affected our budget situation. We have allowed tax breaks to grow and expand, hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies and credits every year.
These persistent tax cuts and the legislators behind them were the focus of a lot of the criticism at the summit, most of which came from House Minority Leader Scott Inman.
It has been a group of legislators who are really governing by a political philosophy, not by a political reality. They believe that if you just keep cutting income taxes, that somehow it'll all grow back to us and everything will be great. But what you see is $1 billion worth of income tax cut the last 10 years, and now we're looking at a $1 billion budget hole.
Inman and other speakers at the summit point out that these income taxes haven't really helped the state economy, and the lion's share of the savings are going to the top 20% of earners in the state.
And most of that income tax has very little, if any, effect for people in my community and most around the state. They get $30 back a year, and that's where we are. And we've got to get our politicians to stop being politicians and start governing by reality.
While income taxes have plummeted, some lawmakers have tried to raise sales taxes in its place, but Inman says that's just another part of the problem.
They're saying, oh, let's go raise taxes on folks who smoke, who happen to be a lot of poorer folks. Let's raise sales taxes on folks. What it means is the folks that could actually afford to pay the taxes, they got the cuts, and the middle class and lower middle class and just working folks in Oklahoma, they're going to pay more when they buy a pack of cigarettes, or they're going to pay more when they go buy milk for their kids.
And this over-reliance on sales taxes to fund the government is being felt in other places too, as Elizabeth Gray, city manager of Sand Springs, told us.
Oklahoma cities are the only state in the union that rely solely on sales tax for the revenue stream. If we're going to look at modernizing sales tax, we need to also look at modernizing other tax sources as well.
By state policy, sales tax is the only source for cities for funding such things as police and fire departments, as well as roads. And lack of access to ad valorem and other revenue streams frustrates city managers like Gray.
I would say that if you're going to look at changing sales tax, change ad valorem as well, so that cities have a diversified income stream. Also, we get no tax dollars from internet sales, so it actually hurts our local businesses. It hurts our local cities because that income stream is now gone from Oklahoma cities.
Many attendees pointed to the individual aspects that should be improved, but others say lawmakers have to look at the bigger picture. Gary Jones is the state auditor.
Part of the reason where we're at is the lack of long-range planning. Instead of having multi-year budgets where you're looking at what possible revenues are going to be in future years and how you're going to be able to have the money necessary to do that, we're dealing with a crisis 1 year at a time.
Deeper tax cuts mean agencies like his won't get as much money from dedicated revolving funds. Normally the legislature can't touch these, but the situation has still affected them.
Sagging oil prices have kind of got us in the hole, but the other things have dug that hole deeper. And so unless you have the amount of revenues you need to cover the expenses that you spend, then you're going to have to spend money out of reserves or revolving funds. And we're starting to deplete those funds. In some cases, they're for dedicated purposes. So we need a better job of managing the state.
Which brings us to the other big question. How do we get out of this? How should lawmakers better manage the government? David Blatt's message to them is don't wait for the oil prices to pick back up to take action.
What we need to do is be able to pursue some long-term sensible things that mean that when we recover, that we're not continuing to face deficits and shortfalls and additional cuts. So we need to put some recurring revenues on the table.
Those revenues would come in the form of trimming tax breaks and corporate loopholes by adopting combined corporate reporting. It's a reform idea that's been on the table for some time, which would limit corporations' abilities to hide money in so-called tax shelters by having them report earnings for each and every part of their company. While the way out is still uncertain, Scott Inman says the most important thing citizens have to do is hold their leaders accountable for it.
They need to understand a couple of things. That one, we didn't get into this mess overnight. It's not just oil and gas prices that put us here. And so what we've got to do as just citizens, we've got to hold our elected officials accountable. We've got to let them know that we understand that their votes, their decisions over the last decade put us into this mess, and it's going to take wise, strong, and effective leadership to make the tough decisions that it will take to get us out of this mess going forward.
And those decisions will indeed be tough, but they will have to be made. Again, David Blatt.
None of this is going to be easy or painless, but we need to be looking at a situation this year that we're able to minimize the severity of cuts. There are going to be cuts. I'm not going to look you in the eye and tell you that there's under any scenario where we're not going to be cutting schools more and healthcare more and colleges and others. There will be some cuts. We need to minimize the severity of that.
When we return, a cautionary tale from north of the border.
You're watching Oklahoma Horizon with Rob McClendon. Weekly insight into your changing world.
Well, since the mid-2000s, Oklahoma lawmakers have cut state income taxes by more than $1 billion. Certainly a savings for taxpayers, but a real problem for state services. And we're not alone. Just to our north, the state of Kansas enacted similar income tax cuts and totally eliminated the personal income tax for certain business owners. But rather than implementing the cuts over the course of a decade like in Oklahoma, in Kansas, the cuts were implemented in just 2 years. It's been called the Kansas experiment, and by their governor's own description, it's a real-life experiment in supply-side economics.
No nation in history has ever survived a tax burden that reached a third of its national income. Today,
since the days of Ronald Reagan, a favorite conservative principle is that by lowering taxes, you spur investment and create more wealth to offset the lost revenue from those tax collections. So when one-time presidential candidate Sam Brownback was elected Kansas governor in 2010,
wow, what a wave! This has really been a clean sweep for a new beginning.
he turned that political philosophy into economic reality by dramatically cutting income tax rates and exempting business income from any income tax liability, saying this would be a shot of adrenaline into the Kansas economy.
Our income tax revenue dropped like a rock.
Dwayne Gosen is the former budget director for the state of Kansas.
Our state revenues were far below the expenses that we needed to pay,
creating a structural deficit that even led to the downgrading of Kansas's credit rating.
Governor, do you have a message for Standard & Poor and some of these other ratings organizations that are whacking the state?
This is, I've said, it's hard to break the addiction to high taxes. It's hard to do, but we need to do it to create growth.
But much of that projected growth never materialized. So Kansas started making cuts to schools, roads, and health care just to make ends meet. But even that wasn't enough.
Even after lowering expenses, they were facing just a huge gap. And finally, at the end of the longest and probably bitterest legislative session in Kansas history, even the most conservative lawmakers voted to raise sales taxes and cigarette taxes and a few other things.
None of this was easy, but it was the right thing to do.
So in 2015, Kansas began to raise taxes, increasing the state's sales tax to its highest rate ever.
And it's not unlike when Reagan did his major tax cut at the first of his administration. The next year, they raised taxes. They said, well, we've got a budget we've got to deal with, and they did. So you had that calibration that you worked with, and I think this is a very similar move to what happened at that point in time.
And probably few know the inside story of the Kansas experiment better than Stephen J. Anderson.
Actually, Sam and I didn't know each other from Adam. He had read some of the things I had written about fiscal conservatism, called me out of the blue to interview with him. When I went up, we had some common goals.
So Anderson became Governor Brownback's budget director during the pinnacle of the tax cuts.
You know, from the minute a plan is instituted to the time that it begins, things change. It was not the governor's tax plan, because what we had was a march to zero that was a gradual descent. When the Senate passed out what they thought was a tax plan that the House would never pass, they made a bad error. You know, one of those events occurs that is a once in a lifetime where all of a sudden you zero a tax out overnight.
And quickly went awry because the tax cuts were not paired with structural changes to government.
It's tough. Government is not like the private sector. Government has a hard time adjusting. There are issues that go on within the internal structure of government that are poorly understood. For example, over a third of any budget in any state is controlled by the federal government. The option does not exist to cut there. It's what we call maintenance of effort.
A problem Oklahoma state lawmakers are having to deal with this session. Oklahoma ranks 17th in the nation in the amount of federal aid we receive, accounting for more than a third of the state's general revenue.
Those structures make it very difficult to change, and I think that's part of what Kansas has ran into.
And Oklahoma may be headed for. Currently, Oklahoma offers tax credits to an array of state businesses. Figure in all the state dollars tied to federal funding, and what is left to spend this legislative session could be less than a fourth of all total state revenue. And of that, 94% is appropriated to the state's 12 largest agencies. A disastrous dilemma for state services any way you slice it. Something our neighbors to the north know all too well.
They essentially shifted our tax burden from income to sales, or pushed it that direction.
Which are widely regarded as more regressive.
In terms of the regressivity of the Kansas March to Zero or the experiment, we've raised sales tax twice this most recent time, and the net impact is that the poorest 40% of Kansans actually saw their overall net tax burden go up.
Annie McKay is the executive director of the Kansas Center for Economic Growth, and says while sales tax hit those that make the least the most, middle-class Kansas families have also seen local property taxes rise to offset the cuts in state dollars.
I think unless Oklahoma recognizes that the income tax cuts are not the way to grow the economy, that Kansas is absolutely what Oklahoma is looking to in terms of the future, what they will have. You know, what Oklahoma seeks to accomplish over 15 years, Kansas condensed down to a 3 or 4 year period. And so we're on the same march. We've just been sprinting through it, whereas Oklahoma's taken a more leisurely walk. But the revenue loss is the same.
Well, excluding the governor, Speaker of the House, and the President Pro Tem in the Senate, no one wields more power than the appropriation chairs. Clerk Jolley holds that responsibility on the Senate side, and he sat down with me to talk about a legislative session that has brought with it some very tough decisions.
We got here in numerous ways, increasing apportionments off the top to take money away from legislative control. That's clearly one thing we did. We've passed sales tax exemptions and income tax credits and all of these different tax credits and exemptions under the theory and belief of it will stimulate a diversification of our economy. But we've also passed things out of the goodness of our hearts as Oklahomans. We're like, you know what, these folks shouldn't have to pay taxes. Let's exempt them from having to pay it. Those things add up. And so I think we're where we are today because of a cascading effect of lots of decisions over years. And when the price of oil plummets, all of it just cascades and we find ourselves in the position we're in today.
Do you feel sometimes handcuffed at the state capitol?
Oh, there's no question we're handcuffed because of off-the-top apportionments that prevent us from being able to have legitimate control over what the priority should be. We have increased funding in areas that I firmly believe if we had put a budget out that showed we were increasing funding in Area A while we were not keeping up in education or in DHS, that budget would have failed. But because it was off the top apportioned, it was done. And there was no debate about it. And more than that, people didn't even think about it. The other thing is State Question 640 absolutely handcuffs the legislature where they cannot raise taxes in a politically realistic way unless they refer it to the vote of the people. And that's what the people decided to do. But by doing that, it restricts the legislature's ability to act quickly. If they're going to act, they have to wait for a year or a year and a half for it to be able to become available. The other reality of that is if somebody wants to say that we should spend more money in this area, then it is intellectually dishonest for them to say we should spend more money in this area. Okay, well, where are you going to get it? How are you going to get it? Are you going to raise taxes? What if you're not going to raise taxes? Then where are you going to get that money to spend? It's easily done to say, I want to increase spending for common education by $500 million. Great. Are you going to get it from a tax increase? Are you going to get it from another government agency? And if so, which government agency are you going to take it from? Are you going to take it from Career Tech? Are you going to take it from Higher Ed? Are you going to take it from the Health Department? Are you going to take it from Corrections or Public Safety? Where do you want to find that $500 million? Because that's the harder question. Saying you favor something is easy. Coming up with a solution of where you're going to pay for it, that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's what makes our lives really difficult right now.
Now, this session will be Jolley's last as Senate Appropriations Chair because of term limits. Now, if you want to hear more of our entire conversation, I do have that streaming at okhorizon.com.
Horizon is at your fingertips. Join us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to catch the segments you may have missed and our latest new content as it happens.
Well, in her State of the State address, Governor Mary Fallin called for a $120 million bond measure to complete the Capitol repair project. Now, this is in addition to another $120 million in bonds already earmarked for that project. Now, joining me now is our Courtney May. So, Court, how is the restoration process coming along?
Well, starting last spring, renovations began on the exterior of the State Capitol building, and as you can see behind me, there's still areas that are blocked off for construction purposes. But this past fall, most of the renovations moved into the interior of the Capitol building. They're repairing stains, cracks, electrical issues, starting with the projects that are most necessary, beginning with things that could be a safety concern.
It's nearing its 100th birthday. If we don't undertake some major restoration and repair work, we could undergo what we call demolition by neglect.
The state capitol building is crumbling. Since 1917, it has lived through freezing Oklahoma winters, hot, dry summers, and heavy rainfalls between, leaving behind stains, cracks, and holes in what once was the pride of Oklahoma.
What we're doing is restoring something we cannot afford to replace, to make sure that 100 years from now, our grandchildren's children can come to this beautiful building. We hope that in another 100 years, they look back and are as proud of us as we are the men who made the sacrifice in 1917 to build it.
Years of neglect and poor maintenance decisions haunt the walls of this 99-year-old building. Its stateliness has diminished since the doors opened in 1917, yet the history remains the same and is being restored, one construction zone at a time.
So Courtney, as anyone who has ever renovated a home knows, once you dig in, you find there's always more work to be done. And I read the Capitol is certainly no different.
Well, while $120 million sounds like a lot of money, it can only go so far when you're dealing with a building that's 450,000 square feet. Contractors have even suggested that another $122 million be put in place to make all of the renovations possible at the state capitol building. However, their doors are still open and visitors are here daily. We were able to follow around Career Tech state officers who are making their case for funding during a competitive budget climate.
Make peak here, Montgomery.
With the legislative session underway, it's an energetic time of year at the state capitol. And adding to the excitement, different colored jackets representing Career Tech student organizations fill the hallways. Former state representative Sky McNeil says this is a time these student organizations should speak up.
They can speak fluently about what Career Tech has given them, and they're going to go out and they're going to visit with these legislators about the value of Career Tech on their future success, about the value of Career Tech in their education now. I think that that is important.
But these student organizations are not extracurricular activities. They are a vital component of career training. Future health professional Little Robinson.
So this is another class that I'm doing to get where I need to be so I can be a better person. Because you build leadership, professionalism, everything that you really need to do to be a great leader in life, and that's what really matters.
Robinson took his case to his state representative, Randy Bass.
And if you truly believe in it, you have to try to do it, see? I mean, and you can do it. So, Mr. Little, you can be a successful young man.
A visitor like Robinson is nothing unusual at the state capitol. Every day, individuals here state their case for public funding. But this year, legislators face a historic financial deficit.
Where are you going to find $1 billion? I mean, they're going to have to go into tax credits and do some cutting on tax credits. And there's a lot of questions ahead of us, who they actually are going to cut $1 billion away from.
House Speaker Pro Tem Lee Denney spoke with these student leaders about the funding battle that is ahead.
And in my opinion, the money does belong in education. It's my fondest hope that although they will receive some cuts, I'm sure, because all of education is about 51% of the budget, I hope those cuts are as minimal as possible.
Yet whatever happens takes nothing away from the experience and connections Robinson says he's gaining from being here.
I'm seeing all the steps I can take to get where they're at. It's really quite inspiring. Let some of them rub off on us so we can grow.
Well, it looks like a productive day, but I do understand one group did have an unusual request on their mind.
That's right. State officers from the HOSA organization challenged Governor Mary Fallin to take a bite from a lemon, raising awareness for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society.
Well, I accept the challenge, and I'm Governor Mary Fallin. Cancer bites, but HOSA bites back.
Well, they're raising awareness not only for leukemia and lymphoma, but they're also raising money. This organization has already raised $9,000 and they're well on their way to their goal of $16,000, all to be used for cancer research.
All right, thank you so much, Court. Now, we'll be bringing you more about the sisters behind the LLS Challenge later this spring. And I do have a link on our website of what a renovated capital will actually look like if the bond measure is approved. Now, to see that and more, just head to okhorizon.com. Is the next industrial revolution just around the corner? Next time on Oklahoma Horizon, we look at the maker movement and the new maker spaces popping up around the country.
These are people who are innovating in their garages, inventing, that makes the world a bit of a richer place.
Getting more Americans to use their hands as well as their heads. On Oklahoma Show for the Heartland, Oklahoma Horizon. Thanks for including us as part of your day. I'm Rob McClendon. Hope to see you back here next week.
Oklahoma Horizon is made possible by the Oklahoma Department of Career and Technology Education and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry.